As you get better and better at speaking English, you might feel one of these two things about your English personality. Either you feel like, number one, nothing has changed about your personality or identity. You're the same exact person, it's just that now English words are coming out of your mouth. Or number two, you feel like Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story 3 when he accidentally gets his language switched from English to Spanish and he suddenly has a completely different personality.
Venga conmigo, señorita. Le enseñaré las maravillas de la galaxia y juntos, con nuestro amor, venceremos al mal.
For most people learning English, they will probably be somewhere in the middle of these two extremes. But I do think that to become a fluent English speaker, it's really helpful to think of yourself as an English speaker. That once you reach a certain level, it's okay, it's appropriate to call yourself an English speaker versus an English learner. And it's also helpful to work on actively forming, actively shaping who this new you is going to be. This is you. And in this video, we're going to talk about how to create this identity and why you should. And for fun, we'll look at actors such as Ana de Armas and Marilyn Monroe to help us process all of this information. Please watch the whole video first and then let me know what you think in the comments down below. Okay, so first of all, the first thing that's important to know is that your identity is not fixed or static. This whole video today is based on the theory that your identity is not fixed, that it's not static, but that it is instead multifaceted, that you have many identities and that they can change over time and space. Everyone has multiple identities. And this is usually a good thing. You're not the same person when you're 7 years old and when you're 27 years old. You're not the same person when you're around your friends versus when you're around your coworkers or your boss or your parents. This is true if you're monolingual, if you speak just one language, but it's especially true if you speak 2 or more languages. There's a concept called cultural frame switching, which is the process of bicultural or multicultural people who change their perspective of the world or even their personality traits depending on the language that is being used. This can be seen in small changes, such as the gestures that people use depending on the language that they are speaking, or it can be seen in deeper ways. For example, some people activate more passionate or confrontational personalities in one language and then might appear more timid or more humble in another language that they speak. At some points in your life and in some situations, these differences in personality might seem very separate from each other, while at some points in your life and in some situations, they may seem to overlap a lot more. Okay, number 2, your identity can be chosen and created. Meaning your various personalities can be chosen and created. This is where things get exciting. Scholar Christine Whedon said, "Language is the place where our sense of ourselves is constructed." In most cases, we have a lot more choice over the people who we choose to be than we think. In this case, we're talking about the person who you want to be in English. So here's the first step. If you really want to be a fluent English speaker, it's time to admit it to yourself. It's time to say it out loud to yourself, speak it out loud into the universe, or write it down on a piece of paper. You would be surprised how many of my students never actually say to themselves, never have actually admitted that they want to be a fluent English speaker, that is their ultimate goal. Usually because they're afraid of failure on some level. They're afraid that they're never going to reach that identity, and so they never admit to themselves that they really want it. So that's the first step. Just say that you want it. And then we can start creating this person every day. Let's look at Ana de Armas for a minute. Ana is a very successful actor who is originally from Cuba and who moved to the United States to make movies in English. even though she did not speak any English when she first arrived. In fact, she performed in her first acting role, speaking her lines phonetically, memorizing the English words without knowing how to speak English. This is amazing, and she did learn how to speak English very quickly. She became so good that she played one of the most famous American icons, Marilyn Monroe, in the movie Blonde, and was nominated for an Oscar for Best Actress. So how did Anna do this?
Well, the voice was one of the most scary things for me. I knew that I had huge disadvantage. I learned English like 6.5, 7 years ago. It was not good. It was just not good. So I knew that I had a lot of work to do.
Anna was scared of playing Marilyn Monroe. She didn't do this without any fear. She was afraid that people might laugh at her, which is a normal feeling to have in a scary situation like this, with lots of pressure and millions of people watching you. But she did something really important.
But I was terrified. I mean, to find the voice and the accent was my biggest fear. Yeah. And I was terrified. I was like, as soon as I opened my mouth, everyone's going to start laughing at me. But at the same time, I knew that fear before speaking is exactly what she was feeling.
Yeah.
I used as much as I could of my own fears and feelings and all of that.
She decided not to do an imitation of Marilyn Monroe.
I was not going to play that game. It's only fair that you also have your space to do your job.
Yeah.
You just don't want to imitate this person. You just don't want to, because then it's very restrictive. You have no room to do anything. You have nothing to explore. You have nothing to create new, to add to the character. So to recreate the idea that they have of that person is just not possible. Very boring as well.
She was not trying to be an exact copy of Marilyn Monroe. This is really important.
You can imitate something and have no soul. I tried to combine, Marilyn with something real.
It is Anna who is making the decisions, who is creating her own character, and that's the important part. She is not trying to imitate other English speakers exactly. She's not trying to be a copy of Marilyn Monroe exactly. Instead, she has created a third in-between space and a third in-between identity that she has control over. It's important to remember that the English-speaking identity that you are in the process of creating must feel authentic to you. This is key to confidence in English speaking. I think that Anna was able to feel confident in playing this role, this Marilyn Monroe role. One, because she had a lot of competence. She studied really hard. And two, she made it her own. When you're first starting out in this process, it's a great idea to choose characters in series and movies, or maybe actors who you really like, or people on YouTube who you want to sound like. That's a great start. But then you have to ask yourself, do you really want to sound like every other American? Maybe the answer is yes. Maybe you're a spy and you do want to sound exactly like every other American. But I think that most people want to feel like themselves in English. They want to create a version of themselves who speaks English. Which brings me to point number 3. Integrate or combine all of your identities. Identities. That's not right. When I was really young and naive and starting off in the workforce, I remember that my really good friend, who is originally from Ethiopia, told me this story. She was telling me how people would often comment on her accent when she spoke English. She was a completely fluent English speaker, had an Ethiopian accent. And sometimes the comments were not very polite. And so I asked her how she would deal with these sort of situations. And my friend told me, it doesn't bother me at all. I love my accent. She said, Brittany, my accent is a part of me. It represents where I'm from. It represents what's inside of me and my family and my history. And people can say what they want about my accent. I love my accent. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say that perspective had not occurred to me before as a language learner. That's the first time that I had heard this perspective in my life, and I loved it. I fell in love with this perspective. Sometimes what's missing about us becoming confident speakers in another language is that we are not honoring or we're not valuing all of our different identities. Another great story about a non-native English-speaking actress is that of Sofia Vergara, who is a Colombian actress who has worked in the United States for many years. She was in a TV series called Modern Family, in which she played a character who is also from Colombia and who has an American husband and a son. And neither her husband nor her son in the series speak Spanish. This is very frustrating for Sofia's character, Gloria, because she would like to be able to express herself in Spanish sometimes with her family in her home.
I can't believe that you're being so what is the word? Selfish, pig-headed.
Really?
Her words, not mine.
Do you know how frustrating it is to have to translate everything in my head before I say it? To have people laugh in my face because I'm struggling to find the words? Do you even know how smart I am in Spanish? Of course you don't. For once, it would be nice to speak to someone in my own language, in my own home.
So I see this as Gloria's family not completely valuing or not completely honoring her Spanish-speaking identity. An identity where Gloria sees herself as a smart person. She says, "You don't know how smart I am in Spanish." They can't see that, or they're not valuing it enough. One of the most frustrating experiences that we can have as human beings is to be seen by the world differently from how we feel inside, or to be valued only for one part of ourselves, to not be seen as a whole person. When we are learning a new language, it can feel like the world is not seeing us correctly, like the world is not seeing all of us. We will talk more about how to deal with the world or other people in number 5. But first, number 4, which is the first obstacle. And obstacle number 1 is you. Every day you tell yourself a story about yourself. And every day you believe this story about yourself more and more. For example, if a teacher tells you that you are bad in math at school, or if you have a really negative experience with math in school, which is a very common issue, you might believe for the rest of your life that you are terrible at math, that you are incapable of doing math. In high school, when I started taking language classes, I was terrible. I thought that they were really boring. I did not enjoy memorizing grammar rules and grammar charts in my French classes in high school. And I just wasn't a very good language learner. And that label stuck with me. I believed that story about myself for so long. Oh, I'm just not good at languages. I'm not a very good language learner. It's not in me. And that identity of bad language learner, that story that I told myself again and again and again, was very, very damaging. It's basically a self-fulfilling prophecy. You believe it, and so you do it, and so you believe it more, and so you do it more. Are you telling yourself that you're a good language learner? Are you telling yourself that you're bad at English? Are you telling other people that you're bad at English? And is this even true? Anybody can learn English. You don't even have to be intelligent to learn English, quite frankly. You just need to be determined, you have to want it, and you have to do the work. That's it. So if you're telling yourself that you're a bad English learner, that you're not good at learning English, consider changing this story that you're telling about yourself. And then the other obstacle is other people. Obstacle number 2. So we're gonna look again at Ana de Armas here in just a minute. Other people are not always going to be supportive of the identity that you choose for yourself, or the English-speaking identity that you're choosing for yourself and that you're creating. That's okay. It's not about them, it's not their lives. However, the problem is that sometimes other people have power and control in your lives. So people like your teacher, or your boss, or maybe even your friends or other people in your society, in your neighborhood. If you're not feeling supported, it can really hurt, and it can make it a lot more difficult for you in your process of creating this English speaking identity. Some English speakers, maybe many English speakers that you run into, will tell you that you have to speak English like this or like that. My husband told me a story. My husband is not a native English speaker, and he was telling me a story about, or just telling me how he often wants to make jokes in English. He's like a highly proficient English speaker, highly fluent. He'll be in a conversation, he wants to say a joke, like a play on words in English, but he stops himself because he thinks that maybe people will just think he's making a mistake in English. I'm not sure if that made sense. So anyway, back to Ana de Armas. In the case of Ana, she was scared, as we said before. And when the movie Blonde came out in theaters, even though Ana had so much positive praise from critics, from audiences, and won many awards or had many award nominations, there were many people still who criticized her for her Cuban accent in the movie, for playing an American native English speaker with her Cuban accent. For critics like this, for these critics, Ana's accent would never be enough. It would never be perfect enough to satisfy what they were looking for. It would never be Marilyn enough. And what I think that's so special about this is for Ana, and I've watched many interviews of her for this video, for Ana, it didn't matter. It did not matter that she had all of these critics saying what they were saying about her accent, because she knew what she was trying to create. She knew all along that she was not trying to imitate Marilyn Monroe, but that she was creating something of her own, as we discussed earlier. And so she believed in herself. And also from watching those other interviews, I believe that she has a really strong support network, friends and directors and people in Hollywood who believed in her as well. So she had a lot of support, and that's important. So if you already have supportive people in your life, that's great. People who are not making fun of you or making you feel bad for trying to develop an English-speaking identity. If you don't have a person or people like this in your life, I would suggest looking for some peers, either in person, maybe a language class, or maybe a group of people you can find online, some kind of English-speaking support group where you can hold each other accountable and cheer for each other in this difficult process of forming a new part of yourself. If you are lacking confidence in speaking English, even though you are at a high level of proficiency, I really want to help you out. I understand how frustrating this problem can be as a language learner myself, so I am going to put a video here about confidence tricks you can use, confidence tricks of famous celebrities. And please let me know before you go any confidence struggles that you may be having in English in your life right now. I would love to hear about them and try to figure out how I can best assist you. Thank you guys. I'll see you next time.